Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to a special edition of APTN National News, where we bring you our coverage of the Pope's visit from last week. Starting with his visit to Musqueam, where Pope Francis begged for forgiveness, offering an apology for the treatment of Indigenous children in residential schools. APTN's Tina House was there.
The day began with a somber visit to the cemetery at the Musqueam First Nation by Pope Francis. While there, he says he had some time to reflect on what took place at the former residential school that once stood here, and offered a silent prayer for those that never made it home. Over at the Arbor, the official event began with a grand entry from chiefs, leaders, and residential school survivors. The procession also included a long red banner with the names of over 4,120 children who never came home from residential schools. Former Truth and Reconciliation Commissioner, Grand Chief Willie Littlechild, made the opening remarks.
During the recent visit to your home at the Vatican by a delegation of Indigenous survivors, elders, knowledge keepers, and youth, you also heard of the abuses so many of us have suffered at this and other residential schools. During our time with you, it was clear to us all that you listened deeply and with great compassion to the testimonies that told of the way our languages were suppressed, our culture taken from us.
For many here, the pain is still evident on their faces as the Pope addressed the crowd.
Estoy aquí en esta tierra que junto a una memoria antigua.
Today, I am here in this land that, along with its ancient memories, preserves the scars of still open wounds. I am here because the first step of my penitential pilgrimage among you is that of again asking forgiveness, of telling you once more that I am deeply sorry. Sorry for the ways in which, regrettably, many Christians supported the colonizing mentality of the powers that oppressed the Indigenous peoples.
Ron Beardy from the Garden Hill First Nations in Manitoba was very emotional after hearing him speak.
As a residential school survivor myself, and I've carried that for a long time, and it's very hard. I got emotional, especially when I thought about the little ones that never made it home, that had their unmarked graves. Those little babies and little boys that did not return to their mummies and daddies.
But for National Chief of the AFN, Roseanne Archibald, she says more work needs to be done.
He didn't address the doctrine of discovery. We've been asking for the revoking of the doctrine of discovery since the beginning of this journey, and he didn't address it at all.
But for Eileen Clearsky, she says that the horrific legacy of residential school has affected generations of her family, and this visit by the Pope is a new beginning in her healing.
The legacy of residential school has had a huge impact on our families, and we're suffering, and we need to heal through that process now with the Pope acknowledging. And now I was so happy that he actually apologized and is looking forward to the future for all First Nations people and children.
Tina House, APTN National News, Musqueam First Nation.
One of the moments from last Monday's ceremony was the gifting of a headdress to Pope Francis. The headdress was gifted to Pope Francis by residential school survivor Wilton Littlechild. He's also a former commissioner of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The online reaction throughout last week had been mostly that of outrage. Samson Cree Nation elder and residential school survivor John Cryer explained the meaning of the gift.
The giving of the headdress is honoring a man as the honorary chief and leader in a community. And so in doing that, he's actually adopted him into as one of our leaders in the community. And so it's an honorary, it's an honoring of the man, it's an honoring of the work that he has done, and it also is recognizing from the community that here is a man that belongs into our tribe.
Thousands of Indigenous people traveled last week for the historic days. Our neighbors to the south were no exception. Our reporter Charlotte Moore-Jacobs sat in on a roundtable prayer with survivors of Indian boarding schools in the United States. They gathered last Sunday in Musqueam in solidarity. Here's that story.
That you're doing, Lord God. We pray that the fields are ready.
Tribal leaders from the United States are doing what they can to ensure the papal visit is done in a good way. That's why they're in Wetaskiwin, showing solidarity for their northern relations, meeting and praying for respected leaders from Musqueam.
The Native American leadership is indeed watching Canada very closely, and in fact has partnered with Canada very closely. Upon learning that the Pope was coming to Canada, we hosted Zoom calls with Canadian and Native American leadership. And we call it that. But Native America doesn't have a border, you're correct. And this is why we got involved.
Kara Curry Hall is an intergenerational survivor from Musqueam who has traveled from North Dakota to watch an apology from Pope Francis take place where her family attended residential school in Ermineskin Cree Nation, Alberta. She says Indigenous survivors in the U.S. are also on a healing journey and require penitence for Indian boarding schools.
Same thing happened in the United States that happened in Canada. They also have, following that report and investigation, legislative pieces that are in place. They're House bills and Senate bills. It's the same bill with different numbers. And it is to establish a Truth and Healing Commission, like what we did in Canada called the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And the discussions are going on now. They had the hearings and it crossed over to the Senate side now. And we're doing our job, lobby the Senate, lobby the entire party. You know, the Republican Party likes to say, we want to work in bipartisan. I said, so then do it. And we're telling them, you need to support this legislative piece. But here's why you need to support the legislative piece, outside of it's the right thing to do, and you need to do it, is that the Pope apologized. The Pope already apologized for that. Why would you not support the legislative piece?
Charlotte Moore-Jacobs, APTN National News, Wetaskiwin, Treaty 6 territory.
On Tuesday, the Pope delivered Mass to tens of thousands of followers at the Commonwealth Stadium. Our Tina House joined us.
We're now on day 2 of the tour of Pope Francis here in Edmonton, Alberta, and we're currently at the Commonwealth Stadium, as currently there's a Mass going on here to close to 65,000 people. There's a lot of orange shirts in the crowd representing Every Child Matters. We had a chance to sit down and talk with a couple of survivors from across Canada that traveled here to see the Pope.
It's nice to be here to see the Pope. I'm glad to be here.
In a way, it's they say it's about forgiving, forgiving, and learn from the past, and moving forward, and basically live life.
I heard he was apologized. That's why I came down. I like to see him in person. This is what I wrote to my people. I'm going to read it. After all these years, over 63 years ago, I went to residential school to Nunavut and Chesterfield Inlet, and every time they mentioned residential school, I would not be myself and get really emotional. I'm very glad that I went to see the Pope. After he spoke, all of my anger went out of my body and ease with myself. Like something went out of my body, and what he said when he apologized. And when I look at him, he's really old and I feel so sorry for him. I know he's really hurting, and I'm also hurting for residential school. But my ancestors taught me never to hate a person.
Soon we'll be boarding a bus heading to Lac St Anne, as Pope Francis is expected to go there to meet people that have traveled there for the annual pilgrimage. We'll get more for you tomorrow on APTN National News. Back to you.
The National Indian Residential School Crisis Line is available for survivors and others who might need support. That number is 1-866-925-4419. We have much more from the papal visit coming up after the break. Stick around. Welcome back to this special edition of APTN National News, where we're looking back on the papal visit. And for some survivors, blending Indigenous and Christian spirituality was a crucial part of their healing journey. A pilgrimage to Lac St Anne took place last week. Our Charlotte Mort-Jacobs was there and has this story.
Thousands of Indigenous believers are participating in the pilgrimage in Lac St Anne in central Alberta. They're awaiting the arrival of Pope Francis.
Right on.
So you have to share these survivors say blending Indigenous and Christian spirituality has been crucial in their healing journey.
When we went to Brazil to see the Pope, and I feel that the Spirit of Jesus, because when I Sundance, it brings us to one.
It's also a day of support.
The first thing I did when I came in here was to smudge all parts of me and put some sage on my shoes just to be protected and to give me strength and to guide me.
Known as Lac St Anne by the Métis, God's Lake by the Alexis Nakota Sioux Nation, and Spirit Lake by the Cree, for generations pilgrims come to wade in the healing waters. For Alberta Métis Nation President Audrey Poitras, she welcomes Pope Francis.
I sat on a committee to talk about where he should come and what, and we did push it because we said this is one of the places that is very important and spiritual to all people. And, you know, on regular Lac St Anne pilgrimage, we get 25,000 people here.
It's a powerful song where it says, Creator, help me. My heart, I have a pain in my heart. And that's a prayer that we're going to do. And we all need healing.
Many here say it's been an emotional week, processing the Pope's apology delivered in Musqueam.
Yesterday, that act, of Chief Wilton Littlechild placing that headdress on the Pope is showing that we are equals, that we are partners. And when we get to the deconstruction of the doctrine of discovery and removal of the papal bulls, this is the start, this is the relationship, and it's going to take time.
In the shrine, Pope Francis wore a Métis sash to the sound of cheers from the crowd.
There may be some that will not accept the apology, but we do, because we were victims of the residential school. It's important that the Pope is here. He's made a commitment to the people, to the Indigenous people of Canada, and he's fulfilling his commitment. And I'm glad that we're here to see him and be with him today.
The pilgrimage to Lac St Anne is the final stop for the Alberta portion of the papal visit in Canada. Charlotte Mort-Jacobs, APTN National News, Lac St Anne.
The Pope was then on to Quebec City. Masses and marches were organized and attended by Indigenous groups there, and our Lindsay Richardson was in attendance.
It normally marks the end of a 9-day pilgrimage, but this year, the St. Anne's Feast, or First Nations Mass, marks the beginning of the Pope's 3-day visit to Quebec. For decades, practicing Catholics have made the trek from their communities to pay homage to St. Anne, but discussions of the Church's residential school's legacy casts a shadow on this year's Mass.
We don't need to be good people to be Christians.
Jack Penishwe is Labrador Innu and a day school survivor, but he understands what people went through at residential schools.
It's almost like if it was a Caucasian children to be removed from that and put in an Indian community or Innu community, people would be furious. People will be out saying, how is it possible that a white Caucasian can live with an Innu people and be removed from his own culture? Like, that's the only way to explain it.
He came with company, his wife, children, and his mother, Elder Nishapet Peneshwe, who was happy to hear the Pope's visit would coincide with the Mass she's attended for years. Some, like Yvette Michel, traveled for several days just to be here.
We have been resilient. That shows that a lot of us are still here. We're still surviving. We're still, moving on and carrying on. That's the message that I'm sending to every generation. We're still here. We just got to think, forgiveness and prayer.
And speaking of long journeys, with sore feet and a strong resolve, a group of 13 survivors and supporters from First Nations across Quebec finally made it to Wendake, 275 kilometers from where they started in Mashtayats. They too carry a message, this one for a new generation of Indigenous children who are watching this visit unfold.
Prenez votre place. Je pense que c'est ça que j'ai à dire. Arrêtez pas de rêver.
With his public address now on the books, Pope Francis will deliver Holy Mass at St Anne de Beaupré Basilica on Thursday morning, in front of thousands of survivors, supporters, and skeptics alike. Lindsay Richardson, APTN National News, Quebec City.
You can catch up and see more of our coverage of the Pope's Road to Truth on our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/APTN News. And again, just a reminder from this heavy week that the National Indian Residential School Crisis Line is available for survivors and others who might need support. That number again is 1-866-925-4419. Time for one more quick break. Coming up, we hear from a residential school survivor in Nunavut ahead of Pope Francis's trip to the north. Stick around. Welcome back to our special edition of APTN National News, looking back on the Pope's visit. And with the Pope in Quebec City, there was just one more stop on his Canadian tour, Iqaluit. The Nunavut capital, home to over 7,000 people, met the Pontiff Friday. Our Kent Driscoll met with a Nunavut residential school survivor.
Even though he's been below the tree line, Pope Francis has had the opportunity to meet some Inuit on this Canadian tour. Tomorrow, he's going to meet a whole lot more. The Pontiff will be at the Nakasuk School in Iqaluit for around 2 hours, a brief stop on his return to Rome. Jack Anawak is a survivor of the Chesterfield Inlet Nunavut Residential School and is a longtime supporter and lobbyist for other residential school survivors. With less than 24 hours to go, we wanted to know how Anawak is feeling.
I feel good about it. I feel thankful that the Pope is coming here to address the concerns that we have been working on.
No one really knows what to expect as far as turnout goes tomorrow. After all, a Pope has never visited Nunavut before. No one knows what to expect. Anawak has a hunch.
I think there'll be an awful lot of people. But at the same time, they'll be all watching. If they're not here, they're all going to be watching the TV, because it's going to be live, I'm sure, across the land. And so what I'm hoping is that after however long he speaks after that, a lot of the people will feel lighter and move on their life forward positively, much more than has been in the past.
The Pope has apologized at other stops on this tour with a mixed reception. Some Indigenous leadership says he hasn't gone far enough. Anawak is keeping his expectations manageable.
And what I want to hear is a heartfelt apology, an apology from the heart, and at the same time hoping that whether it's the Catholic Church or the government will make sure arrangements are made for more healing funds to be dispersed amongst across the land, really.
Well, this parking lot will be a lot more crowded tomorrow when Pope Francis takes the stage that you see behind me. Survivors have been flying into Iqaluit all week long, and the government of Nunavut announced all their employees in Iqaluit will have the day off starting at noon tomorrow so that they can attend. So for now, we're just waiting. Ken Driscoll, APTN National News, Iqaluit.
Many people were working behind the scenes on Pope Francis's trip to Canada. This included about 20 Indigenous translators who were working out of Ottawa to translate the Pope's visit for broadcast into such languages as Cree, Dene, and Mohawk. APTN's Fraser Needham sat down with one of those interpreters.
¿Qué estoy dando de mí? Muchas veces la vida
You're hearing Henry Pitawanakwat translate the Pope's words in Ojibwe. He says working on the papal tour is no easy task because of some of the painful memories it brings up.
It brought about a lot of triggers. It brought about a lot of issues that I've suppressed in the past.
He is fluent in a number of Indigenous languages, but for the Pope's trip to Canada this week, Pitawanakwat is using Ojibwe for viewers all over the world. He didn't attend residential school, but his mother did.
This apology to me does not mean anything to me. It's only a word in the English language. If action is included, then I will accept the apology. I want some retribution from the Jesuit Society.
Despite his misgivings about the visit, he is participating with the goal of gaining support for Indigenous language revitalization.
I want some help, support, to bring our culture and our language back.
And as difficult as things may get this week, Pitawanakwat says he is grateful he has the support of his colleagues to lean on.
So we've been doing some healing circles, sharing our experiences. It's very important because when you're in a grieving state or when you're traumatized, you always believe it's only you. You want to pull yourself out and go sit in a corner somewhere. You don't realize that you have similar problems as your other co-translators. But once you share it, you bring that closeness in.
In an emailed statement to APTN, Crown Indigenous Relations says the federal government is providing $2 million to translate the Pope's trip into 12 different Indigenous languages. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
And that is all the time we have for this special edition of APTN National News, looking back on the visit from Pope Francis. For news anytime or much more on the papal visit, you can go to our website, aptnnews.ca. That's where you'll find a special page that is dedicated just to Pope Francis's visit. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for being with us. Have a great night.